Let's continue our work simplifying expressions. So let's look at part D. Notice in part D, we have two sets of parentheses and two places where we need to distribute. So we have the product of -5 with the sum or the difference of x and 2, and plus the product of 6 and the difference between 3x minus 5. So let's start by using the distributive property. So notice here we have -5, so I'm going to multiply that by x and 2. So -5 times x, keep the subtraction, -5 times 2. Okay, so notice how the signs can get confusing here. You're multiplying each term by -5, okay, but make sure you keep the subtraction symbol. They're eventually going to cancel each other out because subtracting a negative is the same as adding the positive, but you want to keep those as you go so you don't lose any of your signs. Now the next part is plus 6 times 3x. Then we have a minus sign, so minus 6 times 5. Okay. So we use the distributive property. Now let's perform the multiplications. So -5 times x is equivalent to -5x. Keep the subtraction. -5 times 2 is -10. Plus 6 times 3x, well 6 times 3 is 18, so we have 18x, and 6 times 5 is 30. So now we performed all of the multiplication and we want to combine like terms. Now, before we do so, let's rewrite this so we have subtractions here, but let's get rid of this subtracting a negative. And I shouldn't say get rid of, but transform. So -5x, subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. So minus -10 is the same as plus 10. Then we have plus 18x and minus 30. And in general, you'll want to change any of your subtracting a negatives to positive because it will just complicate your future computations, and at this point it's easier just to rewrite it. Okay, now let's look at our like terms. We have -5x and positive 18x, and we have positive 10 and minus 30 or plus -30. So now let's combine them. So we have -5 plus 18 times x. And here we have plus, we could think of it as 10 minus 30. Okay, so we've grouped using the other way we can use the distributive property. Now let's add these results. -5 plus 18 is 13x. 20 minus 30 is -20. And finally, again, we don't like to keep negative numbers in our final expression, except if it's a term out front like this one. So we're going to change this to 13x minus 20. Okay, and now that's our simplest form. We can't perform the subtraction because 13x and 20 are not like terms. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so notice we have some decimals here. Don't let them bother you. Okay, we're going to perform these the same way we would with whole numbers or integers, except we'll be adding or subtracting decimals. Okay, so first, let's look at where we need to apply the distributive property. Here's our parentheses, and then we have a subtraction symbol. And notice there's no visible number there. Here there was a 6, there's a -5, there's a 4 with a subtraction, and here we just have subtracting this expression in the parentheses. Okay, now let's think of this. We're going to start by rewriting it as multiplying by a negative 1. So plus 3.4 plus, I'm going to write it as negative 1 times 4.2x minus 2.7. Okay, so remember with a subtraction symbol or in front of this, we could think of this as 1 times this expression, and that's going to help us out. Okay, so now let's distribute this negative 1 to each of these two terms. The beginning part we can just rewrite. It's not changing. 1.3x plus 3.4. Now multiply each of these terms by negative 1. So plus negative 1 times 4.2x keep the minus sign, negative 1 times 2.7. So we've used the distributive property. Now let's do the multiplication. So we have 1.3x plus 3.4. Now negative 1 times 4.2x, well, if you multiply by negative 1, it just changes the sign of the number. So 4.2 is positive, so this is just negative 4.2x. Negative 1 times 2.7 will be negative 2.7. Now let's look back at the original expression. So this stayed the same, this stayed the same. Instead of subtraction, we have addition. Okay, 4.2x was positive, and we made it negative. There's subtraction. 2.7 was positive, and we made it negative. Okay, so you can think of a subtraction symbol. If you're multiplying by negative 1, it's just going to change the signs of all of the numbers in parentheses. That's the result. So writing this out, using subtraction, we have minus, so I'm changing addition of a negative to subtraction, and changing subtraction of a negative to addition. Okay. So now notice basically all we did is the 4.2x became subtracted and the 2.7 became added. Okay, so this is kind of a shortcut. That's what I do. I start here and I go right to here. I think of this as this is positive, make it minus. This is subtraction, make it addition. Okay, so now let's combine like terms. Here are the x terms. And we have constant terms. So for the x terms, we have 1.3 minus 4.2 times x. And for the constants, we have 3.4 plus 2.7. So now we need to subtract 1.3 minus 4.2. And again, I suggest you do this by hand and then check your work on your calculator. So be your own best friend. Okay, I want you to do this by hand and not go straight to the calculator so you could practice these skills. But then I want you to check it on your calculator so just in case you're making errors or you've forgotten something that you can remediate that now instead of repeating the same mistake. So when I think of 1.3 minus 4.2, remember it's the difference between the two numbers. Okay, and since 4.2 is larger than 1.3, my answer is going to be negative. So I'm going to put the negative sign. Okay. And if I subtract 1 from 4, I get 3.2. If I subtract 0.3, I get 2.9. Okay, so basically what I did is I remembered the rules of integers. I found 4.2 minus 1.3 You could subtract them this way, borrowing 2.9. Okay, and I just kind of used place values to streamline that. So it's negative 2.9x. And now adding these terms, I'm going to add 3 plus 2 is 5. 4/10 and 7/10 is 1 and 2/10, so this is going to be 6 and 2/10. Okay. Again, feel free to do that by hand, write your work, and then check your result. So these are different types of terms, so they can't be simplified any further. Now we have one last one. Sorry, we're running out of room, and I want us to use the idea of, well, I'll call this distributing the subtraction sign or distributing the negative sign here. This is really something you're going to do a lot, so I want you to be skilled at it. I'm just going to erase this previous answer so we have a little more room. Okay, so here's the deal. The first part, we're just going to write it exactly how it is. X squared plus 2x minus 3. Now we're going to say subtracting everything in parentheses is like adding the opposite of everything in parentheses. That means we need to switch every single sign. So instead of negative 2x squared, I'm going to put plus 2x squared. Instead of plus 4x, I'm going to do minus 4x. And instead of minus 7, I have minus and negative 7 is plus 7. Okay. And you can see how much work we saved here rather than doing all of these steps in between. Okay. Really remind yourself that you're distributing it to every term in the parentheses. Okay, so notice every sign. This was negative, now it's positive. This was addition, now it's subtraction. This was subtraction, now it's addition. We changed all of them. Typically, students just do the first one, maybe you cancel them out, okay, and you make errors. Now we'll combine like terms. We have 3 different types of terms here. We have x squared terms. We have x terms. And we have constant terms. So let's start with the x squared terms. This coefficient is 1. So we have 1 plus 2 times x squared. Now for the x terms, so we're going to put our plus sign, then parentheses. Make sure you remember that you're summing all of these things. 2 minus 4 times x. And then we have plus, I'm going to think of this as negative 3 plus 7. Okay, so we use the distributive property, we perform the multiplication, now we're combining like terms, so we need to add these coefficients. This is 3x squared plus 2 minus 4 is negative 2, so we have negative 2x plus negative 3 plus 7 is 4. And again, our final step is we're going to write this plus a negative as subtraction. Okay, so again, unless the first term is negative, we usually write everything as subtraction rather than addition of a negative in the end. We consider that most simple. So 3x squared minus 2x plus 4 is our final simplified result. Notice there's 2 operations to perform, but we can't perform any of them. The x squared terms can't be combined with the x terms. This has 2 factors of x, this has 1 factor of x. And that's our final result.